I never thought I'd end up living full-time in my old hunting cabin, but after my divorce and early retirement, it felt like the only place that still belonged to me. Tucked deep in the woods of northern Georgia, the cabin was quiet, surrounded by towering pines and the occasional rustle of wildlife, a place where cell service barely worked, and the headaches of the modern world couldn't reach me. That was the idea, anyway, but peace has a funny way of attracting chaos. Enter Karen. Her name wasn't actually Karen, but I'll let you decide if the shoe fits. Her real name was Margaret Ann Whitmore, president of the new HOA that had sprouted up down the road like a weed after a few developers began building eco-luxury homes in what used to be wild land. I didn't buy into the development. My property wasn't under their jurisdiction. I made that very clear. But Karen didn't like gray areas, and she really didn't like people who lived outside her control. It started small. First, a polite letter, well, polite-ish, welcoming me to the Elk Ridge community and reminding me that all property appearances must conform to community standards. I laughed. My cabin had stood since the 70s and looked it. Timber siding, a tin roof patched more than a few times, a few solar panels, and a big old satellite dish aimed at the sky. Definitely not HOA approved. So I sent the letter back with 2 words scribbled across the top in Sharpie. Not applicable. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was just the spark. A week later, I came back from a grocery run in town, an hour's drive each way, to find a bright orange citation nailed to my front porch. Unauthorized structure on HOA-managed land. I stared at it, stunned. What land? I walked the perimeter. My property hadn't changed in 30 years, and I knew where my boundary lines were. Still, just to be sure, I drove to T. County Assessor's Office. They confirmed my land was mine, fully private, not under any HOA. Armed with paperwork and fire in my gut, I marched into their community center, a sterile little building at the entrance of Elk Ridge, and demanded to speak with Margaret Ann Whitmore. She greeted me with the smile of someone who thought they'd already won. "Ah, Mr. Caldwell," she said, extending a manicured hand. "We've been meaning to discuss the aesthetic situation on your property." "I don't live in your development," I snapped. "You have zero authority over me." She gave me that smile again, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "We'll see about that," she said, cool as ice. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules or lines or property. It was about control. She couldn't stand that there was a place right next to her tidy little kingdom that didn't bow to her rulebook. Over the next month, things escalated. I started getting visits from code enforcement, bogus complaints, unsafe structure, noise disturbance, aggressive animals. That last one really ticked me off. She was talking about my dogs, Brutus and Scout, 2 retired search and rescue German shepherds I'd adopted from a friend on the force. Trained, disciplined, protective, but never aggressive, unless you gave them a reason. Then came the drone. It buzzed over my property like a mosquito. Every other day, same time. I knew it had to be someone from the HOA. One afternoon I waved my shotgun in the air. Not to shoot, just to make a point. The drone didn't come back after that, but Karen did. I was on a hike that day, only a few hours, just past the creek. When I returned, the dogs were acting off. Brutus, the older one, kept pacing by the front door, ears perked. Scout had his nose to the ground, sniffing like mad. Something wasn't right. Then I saw it. The lock on my front door, scratched, not broken, picked. I froze. I didn't keep anything valuable in the cabin. But that wasn't the point. Someone had been inside my home. I checked the security camera I'd rigged up on the porch, just a basic trail cam with motion detection. Sure enough, there she was, Karen, broad daylight, walking up my steps like she owned the place, a clipboard in hand. She looked around, knocked once, then pulled out a set of lockpicks and started working the door. I watched, stunned, as she let herself in, stayed for 5 minutes, then walked out like nothing happened. That was it. She had crossed a line I didn't even know I had. I took the footage straight to the sheriff. Sheriff didn't want to touch it. "She's connected," he said awkwardly. "Big donors, friends in county planning. You'd need hard evidence she took something or did damage." "Breaking and entering is a crime," I snapped. "Not if the door wasn't damaged," he muttered. "It's trespassing at best, and if she claims she thought it was abandoned..." I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just been robbed twice, once by her, once by the law. But what Karen didn't know was that I'm not a man who forgives easily, and I'm definitely not a man who lets someone walk into my home without consequences. I spent that night walking the property, thinking, planning. The next morning I made some changes. Let's just say I gave the dogs a bit more freedom. And I left the front door unlocked, because next time she broke in, Brutus and Scout would be the ones to greet her, and they don't take kindly to uninvited guests. I didn't sleep much that night, not out of fear, but anticipation. See, when you've spent your life working with search and rescue dogs like I have, you come to trust their instincts, and that day when Scout wouldn't leave the kitchen and Brutus kept sniffing the air like something stank, well, I knew. Karen hadn't just entered my cabin out of nosy curiosity. She was looking for something, and I was damn sure she'd be back to try again. So I made some changes. First, I disabled the lock on the front door. Not broken, just disengaged the internal catch. From the outside, it still looked locked, but now it opened with the lightest touch. Then I moved the camera, set it higher, added a second one above the side window. Finally, I left a little note taped to the fridge. It read, "Smile for the camera, trespasser. My dogs don't call 911. Now, I'm not a cruel man, but I'm also not the kind of man who lets someone walk into his home like it's a bed breakfast. So when I woke up the next morning and found the note missing and muddy paw prints across the kitchen floor, I knew exactly what had happened. I checked the cameras. There she was, Karen. This time, she came during the early morning just before sunrise. Hair up, black athletic wear, gloves on, like she was on some kind of covert HOA mission. No clipboard this time. She went straight for the door, turned the knob. It opened. She stepped inside. And then, chaos. Brutus moved first, like a missile. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just charged. Scout was right behind him. The camera caught a flash of her face mid-scream as the dogs lunged, not to bite, but to block. That's the thing people don't understand about trained dogs. They don't attack, they control. And Brutus, he's a master of crowd control. He cut off her retreat, planted his big body between her and the door. Scout herded her like livestock, driving her back into the center of the room. Karen dropped to the floor in a panic, arms over her head, screaming bloody murder. Brutus barked once, a deep guttural boom that shook the walls. And then, silence. She just sat there, frozen, shaking. Eventually, I guess she realized the dogs weren't going to hurt her. They were just keeping her there. She tried to crawl toward the door. Brutus blocked her. She turned toward the window. Scout stepped in. It went on like that for 6 minutes. 6 glorious, legally recorded minutes. Until I strolled up the driveway with my morning coffee, completely calm, and opened the front door. "Morning," I said. Karen looked up at me from the floor, pale as paper. I didn't yell. I didn't swear. I just took a slow sip of coffee and pointed toward the camera above the door. "You broke in again," I said quietly. This time the dogs were home. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. They attacked me," she shouted. "No," I said, motioning with my hand. Brutus stepped back. Scout followed. "They contained you. You're lucky they're trained." She stood up slowly, brushing herself off, trying to regain some of that fake composure. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she snapped. I laughed. Couldn't help it. "Oh, I hope so," I said, "because I've got the footage. 2 break-ins back to back. One of them with a clear image of you tampering with the lock. Want me to send it to the sheriff again? Or should I just upload it online and let the internet decide?" That shut her up. She stormed off the property, nearly tripping over her own feet. But I wasn't done. Later that day, I filed a report, again with the sheriff, but this time with multiple copies of the footage. I also sent it to the local news tip line, just in case. And then, I got to thinking. Karen wouldn't stop. Not until she got what she wanted. And what she wanted, I finally realized, was my land. Why? I dug around and found out. Turns out Elk Ridge HOA had plans to expand. They wanted to buy my parcel to build a new community nature park. The developers had even drafted plans already, but my property stood in the way, and since I wouldn't sell, they figured they'd pressure me out. Code violations, legal threats, harassment, and maybe even a little illegal entry to find something they could use against me. That's why Karen had broken in. She wanted dirt, a reason to bring the law down on me hard, but she hadn't found anything, except my dogs. Still, I didn't want to just defend myself anymore. I wanted to hit back. Not illegally, not violently, but strategically. So I started planning a little surprise of my own. Step 1, property survey. I hired a licensed surveyor to remap my land and make it legally airtight. Turns out, part of the HOA's fancy walking trail, yes, the one they brag about in their brochures, cut across the northern edge of my property, barely noticeable, maybe 100 feet of trail, but legally trespassing. They'd been using my land for over a year. Karen didn't know that yet, but she would. And when she found out, it would be my turn to welcome her to my house of rules. You ever play chess with someone who underestimates you? They make aggressive moves early, thinking they've got you in check. Meanwhile, you're watching, waiting, letting them dig their own grave, one piece at a time. That's exactly what I was doing with Karen and her little HOA army. The surveyor's report came back a week after Karen's visit. It was official. Elk Ridge's Nature Trail, which they proudly advertised as a scenic, HOA-maintained walk through Georgia's natural beauty, ran a good 110 feet through the north end of my land. Not public land, not community easement, mine, and they'd never asked permission. But I wasn't going to slam the gates shut just yet. I wanted to build the trap first, so I played dumb. I let things be. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything. Every jogger, every dog walker, every couple with their iced coffees strolling past my creek, recorded and logged with timestamps. I even set up trail cams with infrared sensors. I wasn't just going to tell the law they were trespassing. I was going to show them the pattern. It didn't take long for Karen to crawl out of her hole again. This time, she didn't come herself. She sent a code compliance officer, a young guy named Jeff who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He showed up in a county truck, clipboard in hand, awkward smile on his face. "Hey, Mr. Caldwell," he said. "I've got a notice from the Elk Ridge Homeowners Association, something about an aggressive animal situation. Also, they're claiming you've erected surveillance equipment aimed at HOA land." I blinked. Then I laughed. "Let me show you something, Jeff." I brought him inside, showed him the footage of Karen breaking in, not once, but twice, and then the part where my supposedly aggressive dogs held her in place without laying a paw on her. Jeff looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Okay. Wow, he muttered. "I didn't know about any of this." "I'll bet you didn't," I said. "And as for the cameras, they're on my land, monitoring my property line. Just because they caught HOA members trespassing doesn't make me the problem." I handed him a copy of the surveyor's report. He glanced at the highlighted section showing the trail. Then his jaw dropped. "You're kidding," he said. "This trail cuts through your land?" I nodded. "And no one asked me. No easement filed, no compensation, just a bunch of folks traipsing through like they own the place." Jeff scratched his head. "I'll, make some notes," he said. "Look, off the record, if they keep pushing this, you should probably get a lawyer." I smiled. Already did. Truth was, I'd been working with an attorney since the day Karen walked into my cabin, a woman named Nadine, sharp as nails and just as dangerous. She specialized in property law, and when I handed her the surveyor's report and all my camera footage, she said the words I'd been waiting to hear. "We've got enough to make them bleed." But I wasn't ready to go nuclear just yet. I wanted one last piece of the puzzle, so I attended one of their HOA meetings. Oh yes, you heard that right. I, the bearded cabin guy with dogs and a shotgun rack, walked right into their wine and cheese social under the Elk Ridge gazebo like I belonged. Karen nearly dropped her glass of Pinot. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, tightening her grip on her little pearls, "I didn't realize you were part of our community." I gave her my biggest, most sarcastic smile. "Oh, I'm not," I said. "Just thought I'd sit in. After all, the HOA seems very interested in me." People stared. Murmurs passed around. I took a seat, quiet, calm, just observing. Then Karen began her usual speech about community beautification and preserving property values. Then came the complaints section. One older man raised his hand and mentioned the trail. "Been some issues on the north end," he said. "Big dogs near the tree line. My wife got spooked." Karen gave a tight smile. "We're working on a solution." That was my cue. I stood up. "If you mean my dogs," I said loudly, "they're on my property, and so is the north end of your precious trail." Silence. Karen turned red. "That's not accurate," she snapped. "The trail has been there since illegally crossing into my land," I cut her off, pulling out copies of the survey and photos. "I've got footage of your members trespassing, daily. No signage, no permissions, just you all helping yourselves." A woman near the back gasped. Another whispered, "Wait, what?" Karen's composure cracked. "This is not the place. This is exactly the place," I said. "You harassed me, sent bogus code complaints, illegally entered my cabin, lied about my animals, and now you're using my land to boost your property values without so much as a thank you?" I looked around. "If you're all okay with that, then you deserve the lawsuit I'm filing next week." Boom. Checkmate. Karen didn't speak again, and I didn't stay for the snacks. As I left, I heard a couple of residents arguing quietly behind me. It had begun. Divide, disrupt, destabilize. That was step 2, because the real revenge wasn't just legal, it was making sure her own people turned on her. And they were about to. They say the higher the horse, the harder the fall. And Karen, she was sitting on a throne made of matchsticks. After that HOA meeting, the mood in Elk Ridge shifted like a cold wind blowing through their manicured hedges. I didn't have to lift a finger. Whispers started on their own. People began to realize something Karen had worked hard to hide. Her leadership wasn't about community, it was about control, and now they knew she'd crossed into my home, lied to the board, and had them unknowingly trespassing through private land for over a year. HOA meetings that were once her personal stage turned awkward. Neighbors stopped waving at her during their morning walks. One guy, Todd, I think he worked in HVAC, actually drove over to my place to apologize. "She told us you were squatting on unzoned land," he said sheepishly, holding out a six-pack like a peace offering. "Said you were building without permits and had vicious animals running loose." I took the beer, gave him a nod. "Well," I said, "you've met Brutus. He vicious?" Brutus, lying on the porch like a retired linebacker, thumped his tail once. Todd chuckled. "Looks like he's more likely to borrow my slippers than bite me." Exactly. The House of Lies was coming down. But Karen? She wasn't finished. 2 days later, I got a letter, certified mail, from the Elk Ridge HOA Legal Counsel. Big fancy envelope, their logo embossed in gold. The letter was a joke, dressed in legal jargon but flimsy as wet cardboard. It demanded I cease surveillance and remove all cameras facing community property. It accused me of harboring aggressive animals in a manner that endangers neighboring residents and contributing to a hostile environment. Hostile environment? I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. I forwarded the letter to Nadine, my lawyer. She called me 20 minutes later, actually giggling. "Oh, they've got nothing," she said. "If they file suit, they're going to get absolutely smoked. But this," she paused, "this is good." "Good how?" I asked. "Because now we respond, and when we do, we hit back with everything." So we drafted our own letter. In short, it went like this. My cameras were on my land, facing my property line. Perfectly legal. My dogs were licensed, trained, and had never attacked anyone. And most importantly, I had 2 documented incidents of the HOA president unlawfully entering my home. But we didn't stop there. Nadine included a final page titled Notice of Imminent Trespass Action. It stated clearly and in bold lettering that any further use of my land for HOA activities, including their trail, events, or patrols, would be met with legal action, with damages. That letter, we didn't just send it to Karen. We copied the entire HOA board and a few local news outlets while we were at it. Then I did something petty, but oh, it was deliciously petty. I put up a sign at the head of the trail, right where it crossed into my property. It read, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Smile for the camera. My dogs already know your scent." That same day, a post popped up on the neighborhood Facebook group. I don't have Facebook, but a buddy screenshotted it for me. It was Karen, trying to spin the whole thing. Due to an unfortunate miscommunication with a neighboring landowner, we're temporarily closing the North Trail section. We are working toward a positive resolution for all community members. Nice try. The comments weren't having it. Things like, "Wait, did we really build a trail through someone's private land? I thought you said he was a danger to the neighborhood. Why's his footage more believable than your story? You broke into his cabin, Margaret. What's wrong with you?" Oof. But the final blow didn't come from me. It came from within. 3 board members resigned the following week. One of them, a woman named Rachel, sent me a handwritten note. "I joined the HOA to help people, not bully them. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was happening. What she did to you was wrong. For what it's worth, I'm with you." I pinned that note to my fridge, right where Karen's face had once appeared in the security footage. But I wasn't done just yet, because while Karen was spinning stories and watching her little empire crack, I was preparing the final nail. See, in the course of all this, my lawyer had unearthed something interesting. The HOA had been collecting dues and applying them toward trail maintenance, including the section that ran across my land. That's misappropriation of funds, illegal use of private property, and in some states, that's enough for a civil suit that can dissolve an HOA. I wasn't just playing defense anymore. Now I had the shot to bring the whole damn thing down. But first, I needed to give Karen one last gift. One final surprise to let her know exactly how outmatched she was. So I waited for the weekend. I knew she liked to host community walks every Saturday morning. Little events where she could smile, pose for photos, and pretend she was the queen of Elk Ridge. Except this time, the gate at the north trailhead was locked. Chains, padlock, fresh signs on both sides, and posted right in the center, a life-size cardboard cutout of Brutus and Scout, both of them wearing sunglasses, with a sign around their necks that read, "Trespassers beware. We welcome guests, but not burglars." I heard she cried, By the time the cardboard cutout of Brutus and Scout hit Elk Ridge's community page, it had gone semi-viral. A few residents snapped selfies with it, someone even printed it on mugs. Guard Dogs of Georgia, they called it. I didn't make a dime off that, by the way, but I didn't care. Because Karen, she was imploding. Gone were the sunny HOA updates about community cohesion. Now she was focused entirely on damage control. The board was in disarray. 3 members had resigned. One guy named Stewart started a petition to have Karen removed entirely, citing abuse of power and reckless behavior. And while all that brewed in the background, Nadine, my lawyer, was quietly building our case. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. We filed our civil suit 2 weeks later. It wasn't flashy, just a clean surgical action naming the Elk Ridge HOA and Karen individually. The charges? Trespassing, documented twice. Defamation, due to her letters accusing me of illegal activity and aggressive animals. Unlawful surveillance accusations, uncompensated use of private property. And finally, emotional distress tied directly to her harassment campaign and illegal entry into my home. But the real hammer was the misappropriation of funds, because by using HOA money to maintain the trail that crossed into my property without permission or legal rights, they opened themselves up to a full financial audit, and that was a storm they weren't ready for. Within a week, their legal team reached out, begging to settle things quietly. Karen showed up at my cabin the day after that. No clipboard, no pearls, no smug little smile, just sunglasses, a pale face, and a pitiful attempt at peace. I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot, she said weakly. I let the screen door swing closed behind me as I stepped onto the porch, breaking into someone. His home usually does that, I said flatly. She looked down at her shoes. We'd like to avoid court if possible, she murmured. The board is reconsidering a few things. I sipped my coffee, said nothing. She cleared her throat. There's talk of removing me as president. I raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be my problem? No, she whispered. Just thought you should know. I waited a beat, then pointed at the trail behind her. You still think that land belongs to the HOA? She didn't answer. Didn't think so. She turned and walked away. No more threats, no more fake friendliness, just silence. A woman watching the kingdom she built slowly fall into the dirt. And me? I was just getting started. Because now that the suit was filed, Nadine dug deeper. Turns out, Karen had cut corners everywhere. Unauthorized trail maintenance contracts, HOA fees being funneled into events with no receipts, even a kickback scheme involving her cousin's landscaping business. That's the thing about bullies. Once you expose one lie, the rest start to unravel all by themselves. We subpoenaed financial records, forced depositions. It was beautiful. The HOA board, desperate to distance themselves, voted Karen out before the court date even hit. The vote was nearly unanimous. One holdout abstained, probably a friend of hers. And just like that, Karen Whitmore went from HOA queen to pariah. The settlement came next. I wasn't greedy, didn't ask for millions, just enough to make a point. They paid me $45,000 in damages, plus full legal fees. They also signed an agreement to permanently reroute the trail off my land, publicly acknowledge the HOA's misuse of my property, and most importantly, bar Karen from holding any HOA leadership position in the state of Georgia ever again. Oh, and they had to issue a written apology, signed, framed. It hangs in my cabin's entryway, right under the mounted photo of Brutus and Scout. But the story didn't end there. See, after the lawsuit, I started getting letters from other HOAs, from residents, people all over the state. Hey, my HOA is doing the same thing. Can you tell me who your lawyer was? I didn't think we had any rights until I heard what you did, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Karen. This was about a system of people like her, folks who slap on a name tag and think that gives them power to micromanage lives, enforce fake rules, and push around anyone who doesn't fit their mold. So I started a little project, a blog, nothing fancy, just me, some trail cam footage, legal resources, and stories. I called it Cabin Justice, How I Took on the HOA and Won. It grew faster than I expected. Turns out, people love a good revenge story, especially when the revenge is earned. It's funny how a quiet life can become something bigger. I moved to this cabin to get away from people, to live simply, to heal, to find peace. But somehow, one HOA tyrant with a superiority complex, a clipboard, and no sense of boundaries turned my little patch of forest into a battlefield. And now it's something of a symbol. After the lawsuit was settled, I thought things would quiet down. I imagined I'd return to my morning coffee on the porch, splitting wood in the afternoons, long hikes with Brutus and Scout through trails only we walked, and in a way, I did. But something had changed. Not just for me, but for others too. My blog, Cabin Justice, started attracting attention from every corner of the country. People who had been bullied by overzealous HOAs, neighbors who had been fined for ridiculous things like the color of their curtains or the size of a bird feeder. One guy emailed me from Texas saying he was fined $500 for building a wheelchair ramp for his mom. Sound familiar? These weren't just stories. They were calls for help. And slowly something formed. A community of people who had had enough. People like me. But let me back up a bit. Because while the blog was taking off, there was still one final thread I hadn't tied off yet. Karen. Sure, she'd been removed from the HOA. Yes, she'd lost the lawsuit, but she hadn't disappeared. In fact, about 3 months after the settlement, I saw her again, on local news. Apparently, she'd moved into a different community across town and was already volunteering to help with HOA restructuring. You have to hand it to her. She was persistent. But so was I. See, Nadine had made sure that part of our settlement agreement barred Karen from holding any leadership role in an HOA in the state of Georgia. Any, not just Elk Ridge. So I made one phone call. The news anchor who covered the origin. Al's story, the break-in, the dogs, the lawsuit, was happy to do a follow-up. A week later, Karen's name was on the screen again. This time under a headline that read, "Former HOA president barred by court found violating order in new neighborhood." She was removed. Again, and this time publicly humiliated in front of a brand new audience. Poetic justice. The fallout? Delicious. Even her new neighbors started contacting me. I didn't say much, just gave them the names of my lawyer, my blog, and a polite warning to keep their doors locked. But that was the last I heard of Karen, for good. Meanwhile, back in Elk Ridge, things shifted. With Karen gone, the remaining HOA board restructured. Some younger folks joined in. One of them, Rachel, the former board member who'd written me that apology, invited me to their next meeting. "Just to hear you out," she said. "No pressure." So I went, not as a resident, not as a member, just as a neighbor. This time, there were no glares, no fake smiles, no passive-aggressive comments about property standards. Just a room full of people who had learned the hard way that power without respect isn't leadership, it's tyranny. I stood up, looked them in the eyes, and said, "All I ever wanted was to be left alone, but when you come onto someone's land, try to control their life, and cross into their home, you're not enforcing rules, you're declaring war, and I don't lose wars on my land." Dead silence, then applause, and that was it. They voted to permanently abandon the trail that ran near my cabin, not reroute it, not rebrand it, just erase it from the HOA map entirely. That land, it was mine again, untouched, unbothered, free. And as for me, I still live in my little cabin. Brutus is a little slower these days. Scout still barks when the wind hits the back door just right. The trail cams are still up, not because I explosion peck trouble, but because I never want to be blindsided again. And the sign? Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Smile for the camera. My dogs already know your scent. Yeah, it's still there. But I added a new one just below it. Cabin Justice HQ. Welcome to the line no one crosses twice. I didn't go looking for this fight, but once it came to me, I ended it the only way I knew how, with patience, evidence, and 2 very good dogs. And in the end, I got something better than revenge. I got respect.